in real reality, acoustic guitar was my new instrument that I picked up specifically to start Gogol Bordello.
Really?
Yeah, it was. I never saw anything really attractive about it up until I burned through a whole decade of playing like punk hardcore.
Cool. Well, I'm Adam, and this podcast is about you and your journey in music, and we'll talk about the new album as well.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah, I'm excited. So, first off, talk to me about where you're born and raised. I know you've moved around quite a bit, like throughout your life, right?
Yes, I did, but there are just major points that are, it's not so scattered. It's actually pretty. The route is kind of very distinct.
Okay.
I was born and raised in Kiev in Ukraine, and 16 years of age. A journey has begun, and within 1 year, I was in the United States, and first in after a short stay in New York, in Vermont for almost 7 years, and then I made my way back to New York. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you were there in Kiev till you're 16, you said, and then you traveled over.
I was born and raised in Ukraine, yes, in Kiev.
Okay.
Yeah, in capital.
And what about music? Were you born into like a musical household at all, or like how did you get involved in music?
Yeah, I mean, if you kind of take a little deeper look on Ukrainian culture, you'll find it's kind of a very musical people, and on the top of being folklorically musical and music being kind of like the fabric of life and every celebration, it was also a very rock and roll time when I was coming up, and so I took a lot from my father and his brother, who was also a painter and is a painter and a musician, and and everyone else around, like their friends were just heavily on one musical trip or another. I'm talking about metal and all the usual rock suspects. So Ginger Baker and Jeff Beck, kind of more artistically approaching rock music kind of people. Jeff Beck, just recently passed away. Actually, I just saw him right before he
oh my gosh,
amazingly.
Wow.
Backstage at his concert. Yeah, so but that was kind of like I have to say that it wasn't like that kind of musical engagement wasn't typical for Ukraine on that level of rock and roll. I think that maybe more with my generation, it became more of more kids took to it, especially to punk rock. That was our music. I mean, metal is the gateway sometimes, and after that, you quickly discover the next level music, and that is usually something punk rock inspired.
Sure.
Whether it's hardcore or post punk or artcore or whatever it is. It's or techno and psychedelic trance. It's usually kind of starts. All of that usually is preceded by metal.
Right. It's interesting how it kind of comes back to metal. I remember somebody said that Tommy Lee said that like electronic EDM was going to be like the next punk rock, and he said this was like 2008, and then like it became this this thing now that just it blew up. It's just so bizarre that kind of statement was made and it kind of came true.
That's perfectly logical. Actually, it blew up in like 92. I mean,
yeah, no, for sure.
I went to a rave in Montreal in 1992, when I was a baby. Like, it blew up in 2008. Like what? Like
right.
that's when it was over 5 times already. and then it blew
That's
up.
true. Yeah,
That's
that was when it
true.
became like mainstream enough where like, you know, Dead Mouse is headlining a festival or something like that, I guess.
It's so old. It's insane. I mean, it just shows how uneducated people are really about music. They don't know anything anymore. But and I mean, there's just so much more to find out. It's like, you know, I mean, techno starts in late 60s in Detroit, you know what I mean? Like, it's not new.
Right.
The idea of stripped down beat and you know, just enhanced by drugs, and you know, it's a stripped out funk. It's basically stripped down funk. I mean, it's pretty in the theorists of music circles, and it's pretty well known, you know.
Right.
By the
Yeah,
late 70s, Detroit techno was
massive.
A well-grown genre, you know.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I just remember saying that. And I'm like, oh, I guess if you're thinking about more of the now artists that are gonna be headlining when it's making this kind of new resurgence in the mainstream, but
the new artists come and redefine it. That's awesome. But you know, to me,
yeah,
it's just as new as Charleston or Fox.
yeah. Well, so it sounds
Before
like
I left Ukraine, we heard all the proto techno music, you know.
Were you listening to it? Like, were there a lot of like you said you got into punk? Was that a genre that you know was being played by around where you grew up? Like other people were in punk bands, and was that kind of a thing?
Yes, as I said, it was quite. The scene was quite minimal. I mean, you're talking about, you know, a couple hundred people for a huge city of 2.5 million at the time. Kiev was, and but that's kind of like that worldwide. I mean, it's not like in Melbourne, Australia, there was some kind of thousands of people punk scene. It was just always like a couple dozens of people who drive it, and more people coming around from, you know, all the suburbs and other towns to kind of be part of this living, thriving kind of cutting edge music scene. It's pretty much remains to be so. But the specificness of that time was, you know, that it was also coincided with like a lot of, I mean, punk rock was driven by changes that were just in the air, you know. It's not like we got like, you know, all these amazing records from the West and like just listen to it as some kind of archaic thing that's happening somewhere over there. No, it's like as soon as we heard it, you know, we'd go and make our own version of it and make our own spin on it.
Your band is one of the most talented out there, in my opinion. I mean, just what you guys do is I've seen you a couple times live. I live in Nashville now, but when I lived in San Diego, I had seen you a few times, and I was just like blown away by how good you all are. But like for you, like what was the first instrument you learned how to play? Did you play guitar first? Like, was that where you started, or how did you start playing?
When you are 12 or 13 and inside it's all start boiling up and you're a fan of you know, of the bands that I mentioned. Well, at that time, just like, you know, Ronnie James Dio and Iron Maiden and things like that. Yeah, the first thing most likely you're gonna latch on to is drums.
Oh, interesting.
What's the what's the most like, what's the most you know, impactful way to make noise? Drums, you know. So I started out on the drums. In fact, well, brother of my dad, the painter, you know, who babysat me a lot. So, you know, long hair and, you know, dirty pants covered with paint, you know, that was the hang, you know.
That's awesome though.
You know, our art studio, and you know,
wow.
he had like leftovers of the drum set.
Okay.
You know, from when he was like in the peak of that. And it was just, I saw this hi-hat laying around. I was like, what is this? You know, when I was like 5. So what is this? And he's like, you'll get around to it, you'll know. Yeah. And so eventually out of those pieces of snare drum, the hit and the hi-hat, we reconstructed the drum set, and with some pieces I also nicked from school. I had to, I mean, I was like, I'm not doing anything with this,
right? Just sitting there.
and yeah, especially that rock music was not encouraged at the time, so like I was just like, this stuff is coming with me,
They're not gonna miss it.
No. And so it was drums, of course.
Okay.
And drums it's a kind of an interesting phenomena, because if you look in a history of some of the most celebrated front man and woman, you'll see that they were drummers originally.
Right. I know, it's so fascinating to look at that.
I'm talking about James Brown. I'm talking about Iggy Pop. I'm talking about Madonna.
Oh, I didn't know Madonna was a drummer.
Yeah.
Wow.
As the list goes on, there is that connection about the physicality and athleticism of playing drums and the frontman. It's just after a while, these frontmen, that naturally born frontmen, get kind of a little bit antsy on the back, and when they get in the front,
I always found
there's quite a few. The list goes on. I remember like compiling it for some for one reason or another, and it was like dozens of people,
Yeah, like I have a 6-year-old, and we got him a drum set. Like, he became interested in music, so I'm like, here's an instrument that if you know how to play it, you could pretty much play with anyone, right? I mean, like that the drummer is always the hardest person to find, I feel like, when I was growing up, at least.
Fun is important, and fun in a larger sense of cellular level engagement with the universe. Nothing really does it like the drums.
Yeah, he loves. I mean, we have one of those like electric kids, so it's not just annoying the neighbors or whatever. But yeah, he loves it. It's just really cool to see just a little kid learning how to play.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I believed.
So did you have bands when you're in before you were 16 and made it out to Vermont?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
I started creeping ahead out of the drum set shortly after playing it for a couple of years, and started writing songs. So my band in Ukraine was we got a drummer basically to do the drums, and I went in the front and start singing and playing guitar. It was 3, sometimes 4, sometimes 5-piece band. And I guess the thing that really kind of would define that activity, like give it kind of characteristic, what it was all about, was that it was very improvisational, driven, in the same time as there was loose structure of songs. But we were kind of on this trip of birthday party, Nick Cave's band Before the Bad Seeds, and kind of talking heads, like anything that was spasmodic and didn't really require any virtuosity, but had serious groove and this breakthrough kind of vibe, so we were fueled by that music, of kind of Swans and Sonic Youth, and I always was like the motor of the energy, so I always loved GBH, and 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 angelic upstarts, and just bands that just had real energy beyond being just cool, like Talking Heads, So it was a lot of that, just very, very kind of creative music that had more of a feeling of playground rather than like let's rehearse this to death and then perform.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't like that at all.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And would you guys play around, or was it mainly just kind of a, fun, you get together and kind of improv off each other, or was it like you had shows and you were kind of part of the scene there?
All of that, but I have
Okay.
to say that the chief difference between all of that here and all of that there is that we were not really allowed to perform. I mean, to perform, you would have to have some kind of papers from the city and all that kind of thing. I mean, here too, but here's a lot easier to get them. Plus, there's tons of places like teen centers and bars and clubs and whatever. They're not. So to perform something, it would have to, this band had to have some kind of approval, from, they either had to be in students of all this university that somehow got this place to perform. For us, it was main platform for displaying your creativity and your talent was, and participation in a scene was passing around cassette tapes with your recordings. Yes.
Oh, wow.
And showing up at the regular hangs on a particular sidewalks chosen by the cult of punk rockers, and which was actually right there where Maidan was, where in the center of the Kiev, where all the protests took.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, bloodshed and everything in the last 9 years. It's been a talk of the world. But right one block away from it, there was used to this kind of a coffee shop, and that's where we all go down and hang out there, and it was basically a sidewalk of a coffee shop, in the center of the city, and that's where all the eccentrics gathered, and all their leather jackets and green and orange hair and whoever what was championing whatever streak of punk rock they were all about. And it was a really cool thing because there were people who were into metal, people who were like into kind of like trying to be this kind of romantic new wave or kind of thing, or just people who were kind of more orthodox punk rockers, or just eccentrics of all kinds, poets, artists, and it was there all the time. Like you could just go there any night of the week, and it was there. There was some proto kind of skinheads and all kind of things, original skinheads. I'm talking about people who ska and hardcore. All of that was very much present there. Every brand of subculture that you knew here, we had there, just maybe slightly less in numbers.
Sure. And it sounds like you didn't have like venues that you could go play. You're like, oh, you're gonna play this bar and they're this teen center, this thing. Like it wasn't as accessible as it is maybe here, where you could just go play.
It's almost it was pretty much inaccessible. And I mean, I remember one time we got this in our district of Abalon, which is kind of one of the outskirts of Kiev. We had somebody had some kind of personal connection to this guy who had this space that could be used for some kind of communal event, and it was so bureaucratic that he was like, well, in order to have a concert, you have to have a stage, and I don't have a stage. And I was like, well, we don't need a stage. Just let us use the space. He's like, no, you have to have a stage. Otherwise, I can't put it down on paper as a concert. So we're like, all right, fuck it, we'll build the fucking stage. Literally. Then we got all this plywood and all these things and built the fucking stage and got on it and played the fucking show, you know.
Holy shit.
There was like 20 people there, you know.
What's the
like sitting up for a week, you know, with Arm and Hammer, the event that was crucially attended by 20 of your friends. And it was and record it and pass it around as a tape that like, hey, listen, we're singing about how you know, springtime is a really terrible time of the year because it just brings more fucking problems with this and with that, and you know, and just kind of, you know, singing antagonistic punk rock things and passing them around because everything around you on radio and TV was in this kind of this fake positivity propaganda march, you know. So you're just absolutely in this, you know, you're just completely inspired to counterbalance that.
Sure.
At least with some authenticity of street grind, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's to go from, you know, building a stage that you really probably weren't, it was even difficult to get the person to say, sure, you can use the space, and then you have to build your own stage. So like what you guys are doing now, I mean, could you even imagine at that age what you have accomplished, you know, in the crowds you've seen, in the way, in the stages you played on?
Hey man, I wouldn't have it any other way. It was really like building the backbone for future everything.
Sure.
You know, touring in the States and in Europe when we started, you know, with 9, 10, sometimes more people in the van.
Yeah, you guys have quite the
sleeping on top of each other, you know. This went on for years. You know, so in that sense, what is definitely one of my favorite topics. In that sense, you know, underground music and punk rock music is kind of a very it's a beautiful corridor that goes worldwide. You know, like I don't know anything about all those bands and all those careers of musicians who never toured and everybody knows their name, who tweeted their name into worldwide fame, whatever. That's just like, that's fine. That's not what we do, you know. And I'm not interested in being that kind of artist,
right?
And there's a lot of them, yeah, especially now.
I was gonna say, yeah, now it's quite different.
Yeah, I mean, times are always transforming, and in some sense it's easier to reach out now, but it also doesn't build any character, you know what I mean? And the times are always transforming, and they're not going to stay like this now.
Right.
This is planet Earth. There is going to be gravity here, as it was here thousands of years ago, and so into thousands of years into the future. It's not going to be easy, and having a character is going to remain to be important. It's not going to be not important. So this kind of mentality of easy access to this and this and this and that, it's actually undermining your, it's undermining on a general level people's ability to maneuver effectively through life. You know, and it's something that those values gonna go back up.
Oh yeah, for sure.
They're gonna have to go back up because well, you know, they have to. I mean, the life on the planet is gonna remain to be very challenging. So, you know, the problems of like that people think sometimes are problems nowadays that are not real problems, that's a phase. It's gonna get, you know, we already seen world transform quite several times,
right,
in the recent years, you know. it's going to transform again and again and again and again. And it's not going to be getting just progressively more and more easier. So you're going to be doing less touring and less this and less muscle work. No, there always will be need for stamina. And so in a way, circling back to the idea of getting real life grind experience, you know, I'm pretty much considered to be all those things that we've done and had to do that considered to be unthinkable now as huge benefits to really ensure that the kind of ensure your longevity as a group.
I was gonna say, yeah, I feel like the bands that have longevity are the ones that have grinded and are a touring band that you can go to any city and sell X amount of tickets, right? I mean, before even signing to a major label or this or that, a lot of bands, in the 90s, earlier and through the early 2000s were selling multiple tickets in every market before anyone even cared to say, hey, what's this band up to or whatever. It was more like developing a band and having these bands like Green Day, I guess, would be a good example of a band that toured their ass off.
Yeah.
And had 2 albums out before they even really broke.
Yeah, on Lookout Records. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, and so is just about any punk band that became huge.
Right.
They have that in their back pocket, most of them,
And I feel like you guys are obviously the same way. I mean, you've toured so much and you didn't really get the radios. I mean, I worked in radio for a long time, and that was the first time I heard your band, was Tribal Connection. We were playing the song and I was like, what, like, this song is like, it blew my mind how cool it was. Different than anything I had ever heard. So I'm not gonna say like, oh, I knew you guys when the first album came out. Like, that was what kind of sparked it for me. I was like, shit, like, these guys are rad. And then I had seen you come, because I was in San Diego. Maybe you played the Casbah. You played some venue. I went and saw it, and it was insane.
First times in San Diego, we played Casbah. Yeah.
Oh, and then I think you opened up for someone. Oh, maybe it was Primus or something. I remember you guys came through again.
Yeah, there was a tour with Primus. Yeah.
Okay. And I had seen you another time, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But I don't remember. Belly Up Tavern. Does that sound familiar? I don't remember. It was definitely a Casbah at least once. But yeah, I mean, like, having that under your, like you said, in your back pocket, like, you had been touring and doing all these things before probably any sort of major label came around and was like, hey.
Yeah, I mean, major label.
Well, you know what I mean? Like, before interest came to that level of people.
Yeah, but that's pretty classic story. I mean, those people show up when you already have following that is consistent.
Right.
Most of the time they show up to chime in on what's already been made. And
right.
I mean, it's not a secret. I mean, yeah, there was a magazine, Maximum Rock and Roll, and back when I first got in the States, and I used to read it like, front to back. So it was like reviews of all kind of punk concerts and reviews of records that were coming out, and sometimes they would write about bands from Poland and and the punk bands from Finland and Estonia, bands that I knew, and bands that I met. So I was like, wow, this is different from this is what punk rock is all about. Like, you're not gonna find anything like that in Rolling Stone magazine, but right, covering this, and they're not covering some of it for its obscurity, eccentricity sake. It's like, I knew these bands, Deserter, EMKE from Thailand, like, they were kicking ass. These are like GBH, GOA, Dead Kennedys level bands just from there. And so I was reading that magazine and a lot, and which actually where we first got our first mentioned to my previous hardcore punk band from Vermont. And you know, that kind of that was kind of the core of my kind of sensibility of things at the time. And they would already publish articles by like Steve Albini, you know, who wrote this whole kind of his own insight about what major labels are all about, and how what is the strategies they employ, and what does it exactly mean when somebody gets signed for $1 million. See, like that, there's like a breakdown how
wow,
what a rip-off it is, and what does it actually mean, and how much more in debt, and how much in debt you're gonna be.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow.
After that $1 million contract. So,
Yeah,
so that was pretty educational and
very educated. I think
very
people should be
educational.
reading that now. You know what I mean?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And like, I thought that everybody knows this, you know, because all my friends knew this. That's what we
Right.
were reading. We kind of knew what's going on. You know, we would go and see you know, Lollapalooza show with Ministry and Nick Cave and Beastie Boys, and then in Montreal, and then scoot over and go and see a hardcore show with Shelter and you know, and Sick of It All, and
Wow.
and you know, and kind of compare the situations, that how differently they are from, like, you know, bands that are just somewhere behind a velvet rope. You know what I mean? Like, when you have these options of seeing where the realness of music is, you know, you would want to go to. It's like if you went to Lollapalooza early lineups, you know, which were amazing, and to punk and hardcore shows, you would lose any interest in meeting any rock stars that are somehow behind the velvet rope and inaccessible. That
Right.
will literally like evaporate from your interests. Like, why do I need to go and meet these people who are making pretty mediocre music when I see these people right in the front of me who are more charismatic than those guys,
Right.
who come in, load in, kick ass, and then you can hang out with them on a parking lot after the show till the cows come home. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, and you're right. I mean, being in that, having that experience is just such a different thing. I mean, to be able to go see a band and then hang out with them afterward, it's like, oh my gosh, like it just adds like such a level of, like, you know, other than just, like you said, seeing someone behind a velvet rope and being like, oh, there's so and so
Yeah,
100 yards
that never
away.
sat well with me, actually. I mean, I still you know, I just, for me, that kind of approach to music, it reminds to be a sign of some kind of doing music for wrong reasons, you know.
Right.
You know, music has to be I mean, sometimes it's necessary. Listen, people do need privacy, and I'm not being you know, I didn't fall out of the tree yesterday, but generally, as an aesthetic, I think that bands that keep connection with their appreciators, you know, is probably the people who got into music for all the right reasons. You know, and you know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
usually obvious from the songs that they write, you know.
Right. I completely agree. I do want to talk to you about your new album. I just really quickly, I mean, once the band goes and starts, what would you say, like, were there a couple of moments, you know, from your early days that like stuck out as like kind of like a big, you know, turning point for the band, or like kind of a big milestone for you?
You know, it's this is a kind of like a one of ongoing questions. When is the day of the band? Everybody kind of, now the band is on the map. Yeah. When did the band blew up, or like when did the band made it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean that like when you made, just like kind of like an early, like, oh my gosh, because I feel like if you were in a band for 10 years and there was no real movement, that you might be like, maybe I should try something else.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. Something else, yeah, you may try something else with propelling and making greater music, but it doesn't.
True.
But that would be my first instinct. But the answer to all of that, I understand exactly what you mean, but the answer to all of that is there was never such a day. You know, like I cannot remember a one single day where I woke up and I start thinking, oh, okay, now it's here instead of here, you know, because the reality is that it's been like this from the day one of Gogol Bordello. You know, it's a very gradual grassroots following band. So you know, any of those kind of like leaps forward, they were kind of smeared through very long periods of times. And you know, for a lot of people, you know, we supposedly appeared in 2005 with our, you know, first record, Gypsy Punks. That's a third album of the band.
Right.
Actually, fourth album. There was an EP before that that was kind of almost an album. There was, for some people, there were other kind of, the way they discovered the band were through film in soundtracks, or through my acting in the films, 2 films and 1 documentary. For some people, it was some other kind of, you know, one or another splash of publicity. But all those people keep coming, keep discovering band through all those things on the top of the essentially grassroots following that the band already has. You know, like we've been already playing to thousands of people every night before we appeared in any of those things, in any in any of those things I just mentioned. It was like pretty, by the time we were like 5 years into heavy touring, where there was people with word of mouth, and back then, you know, with you know, beginnings of you know, the Facebook and MySpace and all those kind of things. You know, it was already, the following was always pretty solid, and we kind of attracted very maniacal appreciators. You know, so, you know, the most of which, you know, we are still in a tight touch with, you know.
Yeah, I kind of going back to the original point of being the band that's the touring band that's working and grinding, because you could go to any city and sell X amount of tickets because you had been there so many times and you put the work in, right?
It's a bit idealized vision of it, you know, but there is that, you know. And it's also, I think, the nature of the music that we play is, it's in the nature of the music that it's kind of irrelevant to anything like record cycle, or
oh sure,
you know, like which day of the week it is. I mean, sure, it's a lot easier to pack, you know, sell out the place on Friday, Saturday. Everybody knows that. But you know, we play, you know, whether it's Tuesday, Monday, or Wednesday, if you're at our show, it will feel like Friday or Saturday.
Right. Yeah, you guys definitely, yeah, bring the energy every time I've ever seen you.
So it's one of those things where we as a group mastered is kind of conjuring that up, you know. You know, so
yeah. Well, I was gonna say, like, well, talking about the new album, like, when did you start writing this record, and was it affected at all, like, by, you know, the pandemic happening? Like tell me kind of when you started writing it.
Yes, it's kind of affected by everything in the last years, but I wrote it very quickly, actually, after first post-pandemic tour. Just came
Oh,
home,
okay.
you know, and put all my impressions on last, say 2 years into it, you know. And the most distinctive factor for this album was that I wrote it with electric guitar. I usually write with acoustic guitar, which kind of became my main to-go-to instrument. And that's kind of how most of the people, who dig Gogol Bordello, they kind of know me as an acoustic guitar.
Yeah, I didn't realize that you wrote it with an electric guitar. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, in real reality, acoustic guitar was my new instrument that I picked up specifically to start Gogol Bordello.
Really?
Yeah, it was. I never saw anything really attractive about it up until I burned through a whole decade of playing like punk hardcore.
Mm-hmm.
And experimenting with all kind of industrial, more hardcore industrial metallic sound, and having a whole number of projects that were very loud and very riff oriented, and playing it pretty much nonstop. We practiced a lot, and it was a way of life,
Mm-hmm.
and touring around New England, less than Gogol Bordello, but yet going playing colleges and smaller punk clubs, and so at some point when I was like, all right, I'm definitely doing music. I'm a lifer, but I'm kind of I feel like new chapter needs to come in,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of thought that with acoustic guitar, it will be a lot more easier to tell the story, which kept accumulating, and I kind of looked at it as a, can I approach, punk rock and hardcore kind of mixture from a point of view of Johnny Cash, or Nick Cave, or something like, starting to listen to like Leonard Cohen, and and more reflective kind of songwriters, and that's really the birth of Gogol Bordello. And Shane MacGowan, of course, of the Pogues. Like, there would be no Gogol Bordello without the Pogues. Like, I think that's pretty damn clear. But
Mm-hmm.
that band basically gave me archetypal tools for how to take some of the ancient melodies, or pieces of these melodies that have been floating around in air for hundreds of years, sometimes thousands, and how to give them new life and new energy, and tell new stories with them. And it felt, once I got on that train, chiefly from listening and analyzing the work of Shane MacGowan and the Pogues, I kind of, once I got on that train, it kind of, that was the real beginning of Gogol Bordello,
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you wrote pretty much everything up until this new album, then, just going off of the acoustic guitar. And then what made you decide to go kind of back to, I guess it would be your roots, so to speak, with the
Yeah.
electric guitar?
Well, our guitar player, Boris, who's absolutely amazing, he got COVID on tour, and
Oh, wow.
he had to get home. So yeah, to compensate for that, I was basically playing electric and acoustic in the same time, you know, for the rest of the tour.
Wow.
And there was a lot of also angst and of the times that we were in, and I just remember just like that whole spirit of playing electric, how it's not, there's really nothing like it. And I just really reconnected with it. So it wasn't like I wasn't thinking about it. I just came home and like, you know, pulled out an amp and plugged in the electric and started laying down all the demos. That's the material was just coming like loud straight out of the gate. You know, so consequently, the new record, you know, I was like, I think this material will be this is going to be a great time and a chance to collaborate with, you know, none other but Walter Schreifels, you know, our friend and tour buddy from years before, and also the guy who been in so many of my bands that I really, really love, you know, Quicksand and Youth of
Yeah.
and you know, Warzone, like so who continues to constantly bust out some new kind of funk, you know, like Walter is a very central guy in a New York hardcore scene, and in the same time he's also a great songwriter, you know. I mean, he wrote a lot of songs for the Civ, Gorilla Biscuits forgot to mention Gorilla Biscuits.
Yeah.
Definitely used to, you know, like used to had a poster of Gorilla Biscuits that fold out from the record, you know.
Oh yeah, my friend had that on his wall too.
You know, that was like years before I ever met Walter, you know, but it's all clicks back together, you know. And I think that it was a really, really great timing for us to collaborate. You know, we all had time and to contribute to this, and we just kind of actually, it was more like a hang. It was, you know, yeah. Finally, I was able to remove myself from very hands-on producing of the band, because, you know, I trusted his sensibilities so much that I was just like kind of got into a backseat, and I was like, well, if Walter thinks this mix is done, it's done.
Oh wow, so you had to kind of just give it up, like just give it away to him at that point.
In a lot of ways, it's you know, I didn't have to double think and overthink a lot of these kind of decisions, because it was, you know, when you trust somebody and in your, you know, body language already kind of says most of it, you know. So it was a really, really fun way to make the record, mix it together, you know. And, you know, that's why, you know, us being kind of people who soaked into in the genre of various streaks of punk and hardcore for so long, we had a lot of shared references, and yeah, and you know, shared references of music, and we sculpted it, you know, while talking about all these references. It was like in a lot of ways, it was a kind of like a party, you know.
Wow. And do you write typically with the entire band, or was it just you and him working?
Well, I write by myself.
Okay.
It's just somehow, since I was 14, been the way, you know. It's like I would write a song. Well, in my early days, of course, you know, when we were just figuring out how to plug in guitar, you know, whoever plugged in the guitar first, that was the leader of the band.
Right.
That's the guy who wrote the first sound of the band, you know. But as the time went on, it seemed like I was bringing most of the material, and it just stayed that way. It seemed like people were behind that idea, and nobody was questioning my ability to you know, crunch it out and put these Rubik's cubes together, like you know, bring a song that's 3 minutes long with most of it already kind of there. The magic of the band is when the band is in the arrangement and co-writing all the farther parts, you know, and doing that. That's where like joy of being in a band is really at.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that that's kind of where Gogol Bordello is really excels, is kind of taking those songs and getting them to a next level, or sometimes transforming them. That's what keeps it absolutely fun for me, you know. And sometimes it can be unpredictable, you know. The song that I thought was going to be this speed anthem, you know, becomes a ballad, you know, and vice versa. Not always, but that does happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, you know, Gogol Bordello is kind of a bunch of maniacs, you know. These people, like, everybody in the band has energy that exceeds average amount of energy that humans have. So everything is kind of turbo hyper focused. Not always, but for the most part, when it's on, things come together quite quickly. So when you're listening to the record, the takes that we did of every song, it's not like that's like you're listening to a 20th take of the song. Like, no.
Wow.
You're listening to the 3rd, 4th, maybe sometime 6th take of the song since the time that the band played the song first time.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah. I mean, because you guys are such a talented band, as I said earlier. I mean, the songs are so technical, but there's obviously the storyline behind it and your vocal and everything. But when it gets into the instrumental parts, it's just like, yeah, there's a energy even there. You know what I mean? Like you said, everyone's got a little bit more energy than normal.
Yeah, it's pretty thorough. I mean, the instrumentalists in the band are, you know, Sergey and Corey and Boris, you know, Yuri, who is no longer in the band, unfortunately had to get off the road quite a few years back. Our accordion player. I mean, those guys are virtuosos.
Right.
I mean, that literally, like, they have classical training. So that's what allowed the band to really be a singular and standalone, and even go on this ambitious tangent of creating some new kind of punk rock when it's practically impossible. Like, making something in music original is almost impossible. It was impossible decades ago already. I realize how many people already gave that a shot. And by giving it a shot, the body of worldwide music is immense. And the more there is music, the more derivative music is of one another. So coming up with anything that's remotely original is becoming less and less possible. And the thing that allowed us to do that was the juxtaposition of musicians that were kind of street cats like me, you know, and Pedro and Elliot, our first drummer, you know, I mean, who were just self-taught musicians. I mean, I went to musical school, but it was like, I didn't get anything there. Like, nothing I use there, I use in my music writing. Like,
oh, interesting.
That didn't give me anything. You know, but by merging these two worlds and having, you know, Sergey and Yuri as such a class act together, especially, you know, that kind of like gave like a spirit of that we're a punk band on stage and we have an orchestra pit with us,
Sure.
for us, you know, and you know, as a high energy people, they really got into this into the swing of Gogol Bordello, and off we went. And that's the kind of, when it came to describe what is it exactly we do, you know, gypsy punk kind of was naturally occurred in my head, because gypsy music required virtuosity to play, like gypsy music of Romania and Ukraine and Poland and Hungary. You know, there's a long tradition of violin playing. There's big ties with classical music.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the gypsy punk, even though most of the people just don't even think about it that way, what that means. But it also means that it was like, what's the most two obvious legs that we are, what the monster is stomping on? It's punk rock and gypsy music with its ties to classical.
Mm-hmm.
And that was our kind of ambitious, you know, contribution to world of music, kind of like, let's make this new kind of simple punk or something like that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you guys, yeah, the sound that you have created is so unique and doesn't sound like anyone else. I mean, like you said, it's so rare to be able to kind of create a sound that's so unique versus what everything else that's already been done or is already out there.
Yes, it's pretty yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's
a workout to make a claim.
I would bet.
And the thing is that not everything needs to be new. It just needs to be a new angle in things, or a new combination of pre-existing things. Almost everything is.
Right.
You know, honestly speaking, it's a very well-known world. You know, everybody in the art world knows the mechanism. You know, that originality comes really from smashing some pre-existing atoms together in a particular angle, and that's the new creation.
Mm-hmm.
But even to get an new angle becomes more challenging, because things are becoming more and more uniformic. You know, it's not a myth. Like, things are just quite uniformic everywhere you go. I mean, you go to, you know, you go to some remote country and you drink the same drink, and you everybody's wearing the same clothes as you get here on Canal Street in New York City, you know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that triggers off very similar cultural kind of regurgitation.
Mm-hmm.
So to get to a point of being able to conjure up something originally, you have to be really in touch with the deeper culture of the region, you know, which not a lot of people go for.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if they do, they will come up with it.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting to when you put that out there. I was like trying to think, like, yeah, like literally there's the sound that you guys have created is just so unique to anything. I mean, and that's why people love your band, and I love your band, and you all are so talented. It's interesting like that when you said that you wrote the record on electric guitar. Now I'm gonna have to go back and listen to it with those ears, because I would just imagine it was still on acoustic. One of my favorite songs on the record is Blueprint, and it starts off that way. Like it's got the slower. Is it a clean guitar or is it acoustic? I can't remember off the top of my head.
No, it's acoustic. I mean, I still play a lot.
Yeah.
And it's also a cover of Fugazi.
Oh, is it? Oh my gosh. I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah. And yes, it is definitely one of my favorite songs on the album as well. Fugazi being probably my top favorite band of all times.
Oh, amazing. Okay.
It was actually recorded in DC and in Inner Ear Studio, where that particular track, where all Fugazi records were recorded.
Really? That's amazing. Wow, that must have been a great experience. Jeez.
Yeah, we brought the track onto the record, and because it was just fitting. We had it on our it was on hold for a couple of years after we did the whole session there in DC of recording some material there. But this really was, I understood it, why it was held back from Seekers and Finders record, because this is the record it should have been on.
Oh, okay. So you had it done for a while then, because that, yeah, wow, okay.
Yeah, that track was recorded several years ago.
Okay.
And immediately followed by on the Solidarity record with a track that features another legend of all legends from DC, well, originally from England, but it's HR of Bad Brands.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's a great song too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, as I said, you know, Walter and I were having a lot of fun creating the record, and you know, just like, hey, wouldn't it be amazing to have HR on this song? It seems like there's already a spot for it, and you know, through mutual friend, through Jesse Mallon, great songwriter from New York City, also one of the central people here in the punk hardcore scene and songwriter scene. You know, he connected us with HR, and that came together beautifully. You know, we were pretty much an O. Yeah, we're pretty much, you know, things were aligning to create a proper record that had all the vitamins of everything we love about songwriting, gypsy punk rock, hardcore, punk, you know, new sounds that are, you know, new combinations of sounds. It's, you know, so there's more cameos, I mean, features on that album.
Yeah, another one I love is Take Only What You Can Carry. That's probably my second favorite song on the record.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. That's was a direct response to what was started to happen in Ukraine, which is, everybody knows, the war. And that was a song. There's two songs that are heavily on that topic that were for addressing that. And Take Only What You Can Carry is the only time when I took poetry of somebody else, which is a friend of mine from Ukraine, a great poet and novelist and a huge activist, Serhiy Zhadan. He's also a punk rocker. He has a band, and he's coming to the States soon, actually, with a small tour.
Oh, cool.
Hopefully bigger. I think it's going to transform into a much bigger tour, because the guy is absolutely unbelievable. Besides being an amazing writer, like Albert Camus kind of spirit, writer of resistance and absolute wordsmith from God, who was nominated for Nobel Prize several years ago. You know,
wow.
Yeah, we connected when the war started, and you know, it was really important to strike and make things that can really provide morale that's high.
Eugene, I appreciate your time, man, today. Thank you so much for doing this. This has been amazing. I have one more question. I want to know if you have any advice for aspiring artists.
Well, I think that probably, you know, that perseverance is gonna remain to be a key factor, even though the picture has been painted that it's all about getting more followers, and it's all about manicure, and it's all about social media. Those are all tools of the day, of course they are, but make sure that you're getting real followers. Any manicured followers are not your real followers. They will not translate to anything. In order to really do it, you need to come up with quality things first, and quality in its most authentic sense. It needs to be uplifting for the people, you know, and uplifting in a sense that it doesn't need to be in a major key, because Gogol Bordello is, most of it is in minor key actually. You know, Nick Cave is on a superficial point of view, is you know, oftentimes described as the music that you know, from the depressive side of the things, melancholic and this, but I find it incredibly uplifting actually, because it's about confronting the darker side of life. It's about perseverance, and that quality is something that probably is going to be number one quality in anybody's career, whatever is it that you're doing. If you're like, you know, if you're a gardener or raising the bees, or, you know, or writing songs, or whatever is it you're doing, that's going to be your main friend right there. It's all boils back down to discipline, you know, because perseverance is, you know, 50% of it is discipline. So it's like that, you know, that's kind of how I see it. And those are inspirations that I took from people earlier on. They kind of all displayed those qualities, you know. Bringing it backward.